Welcome to an in-depth exploration of a demented serial killer turned demon from the interactive cinematic horror game, The Casting of Frank Stone. This psychotic thriller comes from the universe of Dead by Daylight, and I will show you how they tie in with one another, but more specifically, the killer's role in this connection. I am new to the Dead by Daylight universe. I've never played Dead by Daylight, but I love interactive video games. It reminds me of my time as a kid when I used to read the Goosebumps series, because in those books you could choose your own path. The Casting of Frank Stone was a lot of fun, a lot more fun than I expected. Keep in mind, there will be spoilers ahead. And if you like psychological analysis videos on video game characters, or you like story explained content, why not murder that like and subscribe button? Our journey into Frank Stone's mind starts in Cedar Hills, Oregon, a town marked by its industrial character and defined by the presence of the Cedar Steel Mill. The mill served as the town's primary employer and heartbeat for decades. However, as time passed and wars ended, the demand for local manufacturing dwindled. Cedar Hill began a slow decline. The mill, originally a symbol of pride and opportunity, gradually transformed into a place of monotony, hardship, and despair. Workers like Frank Stone would stay at the mill with few opportunities elsewhere. The mill's imposing, decaying structure loomed over Cedar Hills, a constant reminder of the town's fading prosperity and the bleak reality of its residents. This environment became a breeding ground for frustration, anger, and bitterness, particularly for Frank, who found himself trapped in an unfulfilling existence within the walls of the mill. The mill's decline reflects Frank's own psychological descent, transforming from a place of potential into a symbol of entrapment and repression, setting the stage for his eventual transformation into a bloodthirsty monstrosity. Born and raised here, Frank spent his formative years in a setting that offered little in the way of personal connection or emotional support. Raised by his grandmother, Frank's childhood was marked by emotional neglect with minimal warmth or guidance. The isolation he felt left a lasting impact on his psychological state, contributing to feelings of alienation and resentment. As he grew older, Frank took a job at the Cedar Steel Mill, a place that would come to represent the monotony and confinement he associated with his disenchanted life. While Frank was drawn to violence early on, a significant turning point occurred in 1956 when he was committed to a psychiatric hospital following an assault. This incident provides insight into his inability to cope with the challenges around him and foreshadows his growing instability. By the time he entered the psychiatric ward, Frank was already grappling with a range of unresolved psychological issues stemming from his neglected upbringing and social isolation. The incident that led to his commitment is a key moment in Frank's life, marking the beginning of his descent into a darker mental state. Attachment theory, developed by John Bowlby, helps us to understand Frank's early psychological development. According to this theory, children form an attachment style based on their early relationships with caregivers. If a child experiences love and security, they develop a secure attachment style, and they grow up with a sense of safety and trust. But in Frank's case, his upbringing was marred by neglect and a lack of emotional warmth. A child's first interactions with the world, especially at a formative time, come from caregivers. If a child can't grow up trusting his family, how can they grow up to form relationships with peers in places like school? Albert Bandura's social learning theory provides further insight into Frank's character. This theory suggests that people learn behavior by observing and imitating others. In Frank's case, theory suggests the environment he grew up in and the people around him taught him to see aggression as a means to solve conflicts. Remember, behaviors are taught. Violence is taught. From his early years, Frank witnessed the ways in which control and dominance often emerged from violence, and he internalized these behaviors as acceptable. The aggression he observed and experienced further cemented his belief that fear and physical force were a means to power and control. Now, violence is never the best option, but it is an option, and oftentimes it's a very effective one, which is why it's so unfortunately pervasive in our world today. In the casting of Frank Stone, this learned behavior is evident in how readily Frank resorts to violence. He is ready to throw hands at a moment's notice. No talk, just the unfiltered beatdown. His later brutal acts are rooted in his early conditioning, showing how deeply ingrained these violent tendencies are in his psyche. Sigmund Freud's psychodynamic theory suggests that unresolved traumas and repressed emotions shape behavior, often without the person's conscious awareness. According to Freud, the psyche is divided into three parts: the id, the ego, and the superego. The id represents primal urges, one's immediate instinct that encourages an individual to just act on their base desires. The ego acts as a mediator, a middleman between the id and superego that tries to find balance between the perception of what's okay and what's not okay. And the superego is our moral compass, which tries to follow the societal norms for what is allowed. Now for Frank, his psyche is dominated by the id, with little influence from the superego to regulate his impulses. In the context of his entire life as a whole, we see that Frank's inability to confront his inner pain and trauma allows it to control him from the shadows of his subconscious. His violent acts are expressions of his unresolved emotions, anger, betrayal, and fear, all of these emotions that have festered for years. Freud's theory suggests that Frank's behavior is an unconscious attempt to externalize his inner turmoil, leading him to lash out and harm others without fully understanding why. As Frank matures, he displays traits consistent with antisocial personality disorder, or ASPD, a condition often associated with many real-world serial killers such as Edward Kemper, who, like Frank Stone, is freakishly tall with an intimidating presence. Individuals with ASPD have a distinct disregard for social norms, lack of empathy, and manipulative tendencies. Those with ASPD commonly have histories of childhood trauma and struggle with emotional regulation. He doesn't go online to seek help from a licensed therapist who can help him understand his past and feelings and help to work through them. And no, this isn't an ad read. I'm not big enough yet. A significant turning point in Frank's life comes when he meets Dr. Augustine Lieber, a psychologist who would ultimately manipulate him into becoming a willing agent of darkness. Augustine, a member of the Black Veil cult, preys on Frank's vulnerabilities and convinces him that he has a higher calling. She uses his fragile mental state to instill a belief that his violent tendencies serve a divine purpose. Under her influence, Frank begins to see himself as a chosen instrument of the entity, the cosmic Eldritch being worshipped by the cult. Augustine's manipulation of Frank is a classic example of psychological control, convincing Frank that his violent urges are not only acceptable, but divinely ordained. And I don't need to tell you how dangerous it is to have somebody not only believe that they are right, but also vindicated by a higher power. Augustine's influence is further evidenced in collectible items found throughout the game, where she praises his loyalty and sees him as a tool for summoning the entity. She fills the emotional void left by his neglectful upbringing, making him feel seen and valued for the first time. She exploits his need for meaning and gives him an outlet for his anger, twisting his motivations to align with her dark agenda. His murder sprees become ritualistic, acts of devotions meant to demonstrate his loyalty to the entity. In his mind, he's no longer an outcast. He is chosen, fulfilling a cosmic purpose. And this belief gives him a sense of control and direction, even as it leads him further into madness. This blind devotion ultimately leads him to betray Augustine, allowing the entity to claim her soul. Frank's journey from a neglected child to a fanatical killer reflects the power of manipulation and the lengths to which people will go to find meaning in their lives. The casting of Frank Stone serves as a prelude to Dead by Daylight, providing crucial insight into how the entity draws vulnerable individuals into its realm, corrupting and reshaping them as killers. In the Dead by Daylight universe, the entity is an ancient, malevolent force that feeds on strong human emotions, particularly hope and despair. In order to pierce the veil that separates the entity's realm from ours, to manifest in the physical world and sustain its power, the entity requires conduits, individuals whose actions of extreme violence or profound despair create a bridge between their reality and the entity's dimension. These condiments are crucial because on its own, the entity lacks a direct means of crossing into the mortal realm. It relies on individuals who open themselves to darkness and manipulation to act as portals or gateways. You see, the entity feeds on hope and despair. Hope from the survivors that they will escape this nightmare and live on, only to have that hope demolished. In Dead by Daylight, the entity controls all and it won't let anyone leave. If you escape around, you escape right back to the campfire to load up into the next trial. And if you die, the entity just resurrects you and has you start the cycle again, memories being wiped each and every time. And I think that is absolutely wild, that even death is not an escape. In Dead by Daylight, this setup is foundational, and Frank effectively, ultimately becomes the first killer molded specifically to serve the entity, embodying the concept of a human transformed into a supernatural agent. Is hatred inherited or nurtured? And I have a great psychoanalysis in another cinematic horror video game called The Beast Inside. Consider liking and subscribing on your way out. This channel is just getting started.